Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about how to study and why we should study. We are going to look at Francis Bacon's advice regarding studies and answer these questions. Many of us, especially those who are working and settled, have encountered parents approaching us and asking about their children's studies. They would often demand questions like which subjects to choose for O levels, A levels, or if the child is about to enter the university, then they would demand questions like which major would you recommend? What we find often in these questions by parents is the mention of subjects, majors, and future employability of pursuing a certain path of study. And perhaps none of us would be alarmed at listening to such questions. In fact, we are all very enthusiastic about providing our opinions regarding them. We rarely encounter the question about the nature of studies itself. Even if we are asked about how to study, we know that the questioner is not so much interested in a response that would go into the detail about the philosophy of studies or learning techniques. On the contrary, we know that the answer to this question is concentrated on the objective of achieving good grades. How to study nowadays is a question that, if said completely, would be something like how to study so that we can get a good GPA or excellent grades. This is why teachers are now considered magicians. What they have to do is that they have to enable the student sitting in front of him or her to work through the exam in such a way that in it he excels. Hence, the whole obsession with past papers. Teachers are nowadays not masters of their subject per se, or at least that is not what the parents and society want them to focus on. What the parents want is that even if their child would not understand the theory, he must be able to get through the exam successfully. Basically, our whole education system is devoted to making a student pass the exam, not to become wise. Looking at such a state of education system forces us to find someone who can provide us the true meaning of studies. What should we expect when we take up studies? And how we should approach learning with the goal of gaining wisdom. We have to go back around 400 years. We have to go to the 17th century when the Renaissance had seeded the minds of the intellectuals with the enlightened version of epistemology. For around a millennium, Aristotle had had a towering influence over the way we had been reasoning. His method is called deductive reasoning. The Renaissance thinkers, amongst whom the most prominent was Francis Bacon, were not satisfied with the Aristotelian method. And Bacon then introduced the importance of experience and observation in reaching argumentative conclusion, leading to a different method of reasoning now known as inductive reasoning. Within a century of Bacon's contribution, we get the Industrial Revolution, and then we all know where we stand today. Our world changed a lot in the 17th century, and Bacon was at the center of this revolution as far as its theoretical framework is concerned. Now, this revolutionary thinker, about whom we have been talking until now, also wrote an essay in which he left some advice for posterity regarding studies. The essay is simply entitled Of Studies and hardly runs for a page or two. In this incredibly condensed essay full of wisdom, we can remind ourselves about how we should understand studies, how we should approach studies, and what should be their aim. And since this is an essay written by the thinker who changed the course of history, we should pay close attention to his words. So, Bacon begins his essay with the reply to the most important question that everyone interested in education, especially philosophy of education, should think about all the time. What is education for? This is how Bacon begins his essay. Quote open. Studies serve for delight, for ornament, and for ability. Their chief use for delight is in privateness and retiring. For ornament is in discourse, and for ability is in the judgment and disposition of business. For expert man can execute and perhaps judge of particulars one by one, but the general counsels and the plots and marshalling of affairs come best from those that are learned. Quote close. What are studies for? Our answers tend to be singular. Our society has narrowed our psychological perspective of education in the name of specialization. Our answers usually are focused on one objective. For example, studies are for economic wealth or for professional life. And if someone is wise, then he would say for gaining wisdom, let's say. Whatever the response, it would not be possible to hear a Baconian response for delight, for ornament, and for ability. Then he further explains that what we consider to be our leisure time, studies are usually excluded from this time, as if in leisure time we should not study. This is because we consider thinking to be a task and not something that we say for our leisure time. And thinking is a part of studying alongside reading. This attitude, the one common amongst us, of excluding studies is because we consider studies to be a burden, not a means to calm repose, which are, by the way, the very first words written by Bacon in the essays. So from the first word, our perception of studies has been upended. Then he mentions for ornament. The moment we sit with someone and have a conversation, we know immediately about the level of knowledge possessed by the other person. We create our own perception of this level. It may be right or wrong, but it does create a deep impression within ourselves. If we know that we are meeting a renowned historian, let's say, we would be prepared to talk to him or her with a different rhetoric than the person who has not read a book in his life. A wise man demands respect without even saying a word. He does not want to show off his knowledge, but at the same time, he is annoyed if someone starts to talk stupid. Thirdly, and most importantly, Bacon mentions that we should study for ability. Then explaining it, he exclaims that the object of study should be to form the faculty of judgment. This faculty is the most important when we are thinking about the future, especially when making plans in the future. As soon as we turn our attention towards the future, the first thing we have to do is make a judgment about the future state of affairs. And in light of that, we make decisions in the present. Therefore, another main objective of studies is to strengthen the faculty of judgment so that we make responsible, rational, and justified decisions in the present for the future. Furthermore, Bacon also differentiates significantly between an expert and a learned man. Studies can equally make a man an expert or learned, but the expert is not a polymath. He has devoted his life to one subject and knows pretty much everything about it. Let's say a civil engineer who has been working as a professional for 40 years, he would know every single thing about civil engineering. But would you go to him to ask about a personal problem, whether it relates to future investment or some relationship problems? Most probably not. You would be on the lookout for a person whose mind is polymathic and knows about how to live. He may not have read every book on the matter, but he would have read widely and wisely. He would have formed his mind with observation of the world. But wait a second. How are we imputing this? Sir Francis Bacon, you are famous for highlighting the importance of observation. In your introduction, you have explained that there are three purposes of studies, but You have not said anything about observation. And also, we have heard that you criticized the Aristotelian deductive reasoning, which requires close and long analytic book reading. So, what is your take on that? He would include us amongst the ignorant for having jumped on the conclusion so quickly, and then explain, quote open, to spend too much time in studies is sloth. To use them too much for ornament is affectation. To make judgment wholly by their rules is the humor of a scholar. They perfect nature and are perfected by experience. For natural abilities are like natural plants that need pruning by study, and studies themselves do give forth directions too much at large, except they be bounded in by experience. Crafty men condemn studies, simple men admire them, and wise men use them. For they teach not their own use, but that is a wisdom without them and above them, won by observation. Quote close. Now he has listed down the negative result, even if we keep our purpose straight. If we just keep to books and start to concoct theories without experience, then we will be able to prove that unicorns exist. There is a limit to knowledge and argumentation. We need to bring our well-formed theories to the court of common sense guided by experience and see if they stand the test in front of the jury. And most importantly, if they do not stand the test of common sense experience, then without a doubt, philosophy or theories in general will be laughed out of the hall. This is what Bacon is trying to explain here. Each one of us is endowed with natural abilities. Someone has passion for literature, someone has passion for technology, someone has passion for chemistry, but it is only through studying that we explore these talents. But that is not it. Even if we decide to do a PhD in a subject we like, we also have to ensure that, as Bacon says, we learned how to use that knowledge. We should not study just for the sake of our admiration for the subject. We should have as our aim its usage for the betterment of ourselves and the society at large. Okay, we understand the limitations that you have put on the pursuit of knowledge, sir. But we have another question for you. In the beginning, you said that we should read no matter what. And then you put a condition that we should read but test it and carve out its utility according to the limits set by experience. We want to know, how did you read? You must have devoured books all your life. What should be our reading strategy to make our studies effective? Bacon would immediately reply as if he were ready for this question. He says, quote open, read not to contradict and confute, nor to believe and take for granted, nor to find talk and discourse, but to weigh and consider. Some books are to be tasted, others to be swallowed, and some few to be chewed and digested. That is, some books are to be read only in parts, others to be read but not curiously, and some few to be read wholly and with diligence and attention. Some books also may be read by deputy and extracts made of them by others. But that would be only in the less important arguments and the meaner sort of books. Else distilled books are like common distilled waters, flashy things. Quote close. This advice should give us reader the breath of fresh air. A reader is constantly struggling with the urge to read another book, and because of which he or she usually leaves the book halfway and then jump to another. And not having read more than a few pages, we find a new interest and leave the second book to start the third one. By the end of the month, we would have a pile of books with bookmarks in each one of them as a reminder that we have yet to finish this book. Bacon wants us to disabuse ourselves of this obsession with reading closely every single book and forcing ourselves into a closed room and not move forward with life as if unless we finish the book, the world would not spin ahead. But the reality is that the world keeps on spinning. And though we might be spending days and nights deciphering what Kant has written in his first critique, we would be missing dearly the text of experience etched upon our everyday life, which is much more lively. And that is precisely the stuff from which Kant got the matter for his first critique. Therefore, we need to categorize our reading list and see which books should just be tasted, which should be swallowed, and which should be chewed and digested. But interestingly enough, Bacon as of now has not himself categorized the books. He knows everyone has a different interest and goal of study, so everyone must categorize for themselves. No two persons read the same book is a famous quotation. With Bacon, we can conclude that no two persons have the same reading list. Check it for yourself. Ask your friend what they plan on reading this year and then compare it with yours. But now you can advise your friend that categorize the list further according to the Baconian categories. Reading for Bacon is not just of words, it is also of natural science. As we all know, it is the scientific community that has benefited the most from his contribution to the concept of inductive reasoning. From his observation of the world, it is like reading the text written in natural laws by the grand designer of the universe, and the text in the book must correspond and aid the reader to create a holistic experience, which includes both the signs etched on the page and signs etched in the night sky. Following this description of the world, we get two kinds of writers. One divine, who has written natural divine laws, and two the human writers, who write to decipher divinity. But, sir, what about writing? You have talked about reading until now. We are also reminded that you are not just a reader but also a writer. You have not told us what is the relation between reading and writing, and whether we should focus more on reading or writing. Bacon would be a bit surprised that we have realized such an important relation after such a long time. He would be waiting for us to ask this question also. He replies, quote open, reading maketh a full man, conference a ready man, and writing an exact man. And therefore, if a man write little, he had need have a great memory. If he confer little, he had need have a pleasant wit. If he read little, he had need have much cunning, to seem to know that he doth not. Quote close. What happens when we write? So let's say we are given a task of writing an essay on the concept of being and Heidegger's being and time. Before we start writing, we would want to know as many nuances and occurrences of the concept of being in the book, and then further read what others have said about it, and then further read their contradiction, and then we would give our justifications regarding whom we agree with or whom we disagree with. In Bacon's words, we are made exact through writing. Whenever we write about something, we become serious about it and think hard and remove the rust of idle reading, which is usually followed by a condescending remark itself betraying its falsehood. We have understood everything. No need to talk further about it. Ask this person to write an essay on it. Put the paper in front of him and ask him to write a short analysis. He would squirm and walk away after having written some few stupid lines for introduction. If he would even care to do that, I mean. Writing organizes our ideas. It also shows us our true worth in the world of ideas. The real worth of a thinker shines forth when he dares to contradict Sartre with whatever honest intellectual arsenal he has against him, because it requires deep thought and real life examples. Now, sir, before leaving, we would want you to give us some advice regarding subjects. Sorry to disturb you with this word, but in our world we talk about history, mathematics, philosophy. Do you have anything to say about them? Like, when should we read history? When should we read mathematics or philosophy? You have already told us everything, but if you speak in this language, it would be very practical for us 400 years down the lane when we will have so many departments in universities. Sir Francis Bacon would come closer to us, and just when we are about to take the last sip of coffee, and in a serious tone would conclude the meeting, as I conclude this essay. Quote open. Histories make men wise, poets witty, the mathematics subtle, natural philosophy deep, moral grave, logic and rhetoric able to contend. Abuen studia in mores, studies pass into and influence manners. Nay, there is no stand or impediment in the wit, but may be wrought out by fit studies, like as diseases of the body may have appropriate exercises. Bowling is good for the stone and reins, shooting for the lungs and breast, gentle walking for the stomach, riding for the head, and the like. So if a man's wit be wandering, let him study the mathematics. For in demonstrations, if his wit be called away never so little, he must begin again. If his wit be not apt to distinguish or find differences, let him study the schoolmen, for they are seminae sectores, splitters of hairs. If he be not apt to beat over matters, to call up one thing to prove and illustrate another, let him study the lawyer's cases. So every defect of the mind may have a special receipt. Quote close. Does his advice seem 400 years old at all? Thank you, everyone.